That's a $4 billion warship burning for over 4 days while sitting right at her home port. USS Bonhomme Richard had been at Naval Base San Diego for almost 2 years, undergoing upgrades to support the integration of F-35B aircraft. And that is when the fire broke out. The damages were so extensive that the ship had to be decommissioned, but how could Bonhomme Richard have been lost to a fire in a shipyard environment despite all the readily available fire prevention programs and resources? Well, ask USS Miami, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine which was the victim of an onboard fire 8 years earlier while undergoing overhaul at a shipyard in 2012, resulting in her decommissioning. Turns out, to start a fire, you need oxygen, fuel, and heat. But for it to continue burning, you need neglect, mismanagement, and incompetence. On Sunday, July 12, 2020, around 8 a.m., a fire started in the lower vehicle deck of the amphibious assault ship USS Bonhomme Richard. The upper and lower vehicle decks are basically storage areas for vehicles and other equipment aboard the ship. Bonhomme Richard had been undergoing maintenance for almost 2 years. Now, it's very well understood that the risk of fire during extended maintenance periods is significantly higher than when the ship is operating at sea. This is because of all the equipment and materials that contractors bring on board, which can be flammable and combustible, and the fact that some onboard systems may be temporarily out of service. This was in fact the key takeaway from the investigation that looked into the USS Miami fire in 2012 and resulted in the development of policies and procedures, namely the 8010 Manual, an industrial ship safety manual for fire prevention and response. I suppose the key takeaway from the Bonhomme Richard fire investigation is that policies and procedures are no good if they're not being followed and enforced. Around 8:10 a.m., a junior sailor who was walking through the upper vehicle deck, that's one level above where the fire was, noticed a hazy white fog in the lower vehicle deck. But because she didn't smell smoke, she didn't bother reporting it. She was one of the approximately 138 sailors that were present that morning, 115 of which were on duty. Shortly after, another sailor observed white smoke rising from the lower V-ramp and ran up to tell the officer of the deck about the smoke. But it was about 20 minutes after the first sailor saw the white fog that the fire was announced on the main public address circuits. The announcement was delayed because sailors thought the smoke may have had a benign reason, like smoke from starting a diesel generator, so they wanted to first investigate it. That announcement was the first time that the Command Duty Officer, or CDO, learned about the fire on the ship. The CDO is the person who's in charge of the ship in the absence of the commanding officer. In this case, though, the person in charge was standing his very first duty day as CDO. He stepped out and saw the crew gearing up to deal with the fire, and immediately contacted the commanding officer who was at home. But instead of calling him, he sent him a text message. I'm guessing it looked something like this. He also texted the executive officer, and even though the text message was seen by the commanding and executive officers within a few minutes, I think everyone would agree. If someone's car, house, or ship is on fire, you really should call them, not send them fire emojis. We're already 30 minutes into this fire, and so far, no firefighting efforts have been done. A fire can do a lot of damage in 30 minutes, but forget about that, because it took almost 2 hours from the time the fire was reported until any fire suppression agents were deployed on the fire, by which time the fire was basically out of control. But the reasons that led to losing the ship will blow your mind. When initial responders from Ship's Force descended into the lower V area, no one shared the same understanding of what firefighting capabilities were actually online. Because the ship was in maintenance, some of the systems were offline. For example, more than 87% of the ship's fire stations were out of service. The real problem, however, wasn't the quantity of the fire stations that were in service. It was that nobody knew which fire stations were active and which ones weren't. so sailors were going around the ship unsuccessfully trying to locate a fire station and hose that was in service. Shortly after 8:30 a.m., FedFire crew from Naval Base San Diego arrived at Pier 2, where the ship was berthed. All U.S. naval bases have federal fire departments on site, called FedFire. Interestingly, no one from Bonhomme Richard had contacted FedFire. Someone working on the base had noticed the smoke and called them. You have to realize that now, in addition to the sailors who are trying to control the fire, a second entity, which is FedFire, has shown up to help. It is critical that firefighting efforts of the sailors and FedFire are coordinated, and this requires a good leader. Unfortunately, the command duty officer was on day one of his job, and when firefighters from FedFire checked in with the CDO, they were not provided with any direction or actionable information. So they got to work on their own, pulling their fire hoses nearly 30 feet vertically up the portside aircraft elevator into the hangar, to then go down the ramp to the upper V and then to the lower V, where the fire was. But they could have saved a lot of time and effort by going into the side port door, which was located further down the pier, and could have provided immediate access to the upper V. But that wasn't communicated to FedFire at the time. The lack of direction and leadership from Ship's Force led FedFire to operate as an independent unit. On top of that, the firefighting hoses that FedFire had were not compatible with the Navy's firefighting systems on the ship. My understanding is that the fire departments on naval bases already know this, but somehow FedFire didn't have the appropriate adapters to hook into the ship's fire systems. At 9:05, almost an hour into the fire, Bonhomme Richard's commanding officer, who had got the text message, arrived at Naval Base San Diego, and so did additional firefighters from various municipal fire departments which were organized under the San Diego Fire Department. But the crew from FedFire and the crew from San Diego Fire Department didn't have compatible radios, so their efforts could not be integrated. A lot of the communication was happening using cell phones. According to the investigation report, throughout the first 3 hours, and with rare exception, there were no attempts by the commanding officer, the CDO, or other Bonhomme Richard leaders to integrate civilian firefighters with the sailors. In fact, many of the ship's personnel had assumed that FedFire had taken control of the firefighting efforts. This was a total disorganization. Around 9:15, the Bonhomme Richard leaders who were on site ordered sailors who didn't have proper breathing apparatus to evacuate due to significant growth of smoke. By 9:30 a.m., all Bonhomme Richard personnel had begun to evacuate. But wait a second. If office buildings have sprinklers, shouldn't ships also have some sort of fire suppression system? Well, they do. Bonhomme Richard was equipped with extensive shipboard firefighting systems, including aqueous film-forming foam, or AFFF. AFFF works by producing an aqueous film that spreads across the surface of the fire, suppressing flammable liquid vapor, effectively suffocating the fire hazard. But on the day of the fire, the AFFF was never put into action, in part because maintenance was not properly performed to keep it ready, and in part because the crew lacked familiarity with the capability and availability of the AFFF system. At this point, combustible materials stored in upper V had also ignited from heat radiating through the lower V, creating additional fires. The San Diego Fire Department and its municipal partners eventually engaged the fires in the upper V for approximately 45 minutes. FedFire also joined them in their efforts. But shortly after 10:30 a.m., the incident commanders of both FedFire and San Diego Fire Department noticed the fire conditions were worsening and ordered the withdrawal of all firefighters from the ship. This was the right decision because at 10:50 a.m., less than 5 minutes after the last firefighter had exited Bonhomme Richard, a major explosion rocked the ship, blowing debris across the pier and knocking down firefighters and sailors. After the explosion, all personnel completely evacuated the pier. Even though the firefighting efforts continued for 4 more days using helicopters and tugboats, none of it could bring Bonhomme Richard back. The earlier failures to either extinguish or contain the fire caused some compartments to reach temperatures above 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The interior of the ship's superstructure, made of aluminum, melted completely in such heat, converting into molten metal that flowed into the spaces below. In the aftermath of the fire, a number of things happened. First and foremost, everyone was wondering how the fire had started. A young sailor was suspected to have started the fire and was under investigation. Although on September 30th, 2022, more than 2 years after investigations began, a judge found the young sailor not guilty. Other investigations looked into the reason behind the inability to extinguish the fire. They found that during the 19 months that the ship was undergoing maintenance, repeated failures allowed for the accumulation of significant risk and an inadequately prepared crew, which led to an ineffective fire response. Basically, the ship was not kept in good shape during maintenance. The sailors assigned to the ship did not have the proper training to deal with the fire. Naval Base San Diego had failed to ensure their firefighters were trained to properly respond to a shipboard fire. And finally, the leadership provided by the commanders across various organizations that were involved had been ineffective. Repairs to the ship were estimated to take up to 7 years and cost up to $3.2 billion. So the ship was decommissioned on April 15, 2021 and sold to International Shipbreaking Limited in Texas for $3.6 million. After harvesting the undamaged parts by the Navy, the ship would be broken up and recycled. A Wasp-class amphibious warship like Bonhomme Richard was too large to transit the Panama Canal. However, during its preparation for towing from San Diego, the aircraft's elevators and the island were removed, which allowed the ship to fit through the locks of the canal, making it a much shorter trip from California to Texas. It remains to be seen whether the lessons learned from the loss of USS Miami and now USS Bonhomme Richard would prevent similar future incidents in shipyards.